My name is James Wilson, and I never thought I would be sharing something this profound with the world. What happened to me on November 7th, 2025, has changed everything I believed about our time on Earth and the critical moments humanity is about to face. The vision Jesus gave me about what's coming in the final weeks of this year, and the shocking truth about how the mark of the beast will be rejected by those who truly know him still reverberates. Through every fiber of my being, I'm a 29-year-old Army sergeant stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado Springs. I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, and I've always been the kind of soldier who faces reality head-on, no matter how harsh it might be. My faith has always been strong, but it was the quiet kind of faith that soldiers carry, something personal and steady that gets you through the darkest nights in foreign lands. I never imagined God would use me to deliver a message of this magnitude to his people. That Thursday morning started like countless others during our winter training exercises. The Colorado mountains were already heavy with snow, and the temperature had dropped to -15 degrees overnight. Our unit was conducting survival training in the back country, preparing for potential deployment to northern regions. I remember the crisp air burning my lungs as we set out before dawn, the way the snow crunched under our boots, and how the first light of sunrise painted the peaks around us in brilliant golden pink. I was leading a small patrol about 12 miles from base camp when the avalanche hit. We had been moving through what our maps showed as a relatively safe corridor between 2 ridges. But the recent heavy snowfall had created unstable conditions that even our experienced mountain warfare instructors hadn't anticipated. The sounds came first, a deep rumbling that seemed to emerge from the very bones of the mountain itself. I turned to see a massive wall of white death thundering down the slope toward us, moving faster than anything natural should move. There was no time to run, no time to take cover, no time to do anything except shout a warning to my men and feel my heart pound one final time before the avalanche consumed everything in its path. The impact was instantaneous and overwhelming. One moment I was standing on solid ground, shouting orders to my squad. In the next, I felt myself being lifted, tumbled, and crushed by what felt like the weight of the entire mountain. The cold was so intense it burned, and then everything went dark and silent. But death was not darkness. Death was not silence. Death was not the end. I found myself rising above my own body, which lay motionless beneath tons of snow and debris. There was no pain, no struggle for breath, no desperate fight for survival. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of release, as if I had been carrying an enormous weight my entire life, and had finally been allowed to set it down. I could see my physical form below, partially buried, my face peaceful despite the violence of what had just occurred. That's when the light appeared, and everything I thought I knew about reality shattered completely. The light was not like any illumination I had ever witnessed. Even during the most spectacular sunrises over the Afghan mountains, this light was alive, pulsing with intelligence and love so pure, it made me weep with joy before I even understood what was happening. As I moved toward it, I heard a voice that made my spirit recognize truth itself. "James," the voice said, and immediately I knew I was in the presence of Jesus Christ. Though the brilliance made it difficult to see his features clearly at first, there was no question about who stood before me. Every cell of my spiritual body responded to his presence with recognition that went deeper than knowledge, deeper than faith, deeper than anything I had ever experienced in my earthly life. "My son," he said, his voice carrying both infinite tenderness and urgent authority, "I have brought you here because my people must understand what is about to unfold." November 2025 marks the beginning of the final test, and many who think they are prepared will discover they are not ready for what is coming. As my eyes adjusted to the glory surrounding him, I could see his face more clearly. His eyes held depths of compassion that seemed to contain every tear ever shed, every prayer ever whispered, every heart that had ever cried out for hope. When he looked at me, I felt completely known and completely loved, despite every failure and doubt I'd carried throughout my military career and my spiritual journey. "Lord," I whispered, though not with physical words, "why me? I'm just a soldier. Who would listen to someone like me?" His smile was gentle, but filled with divine purpose. "I have always chosen the unlikely to confound the wise. Your training has prepared you for this moment more than you realize. Soldiers understand the gravity of following orders, the importance of accurate intelligence, and the cost of ignoring warnings. You will speak with authority because you have learned to recognize true authority." Suddenly, we were no longer in that brilliant space, but standing in what appeared to be a vast control room overlooking all of creation. I could see the earth below us, but it was not the earth as it appears to satellite images or astronauts. This was the earth as God sees it, with every spiritual force visible, every prayer rising like incense, every act of love shining like starlight, and every deed of darkness creating shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent life. "Watch carefully," Jesus instructed, "as I show you what will unfold in the coming weeks." The enemy has prepared his final deception for decades, but November 2025 is when he will spring the trap. Yet those who truly know me will recognize the counterfeit and stand firm. The scene before us began to shift and change, showing me events that would begin just days from now and extend through the end of this year and beyond. What I saw filled me with both terror and tremendous hope, because while the deception would be more sophisticated than anything in human history, the power of God to protect and provide for his faithful people would be demonstrated in ways that would leave no doubt about who truly reigns over all creation. I watched as a crisis unlike any the modern world had ever experienced began to unfold across multiple continents simultaneously. It started with what appeared to be coordinated cyber attacks on financial institutions, but these were not ordinary hackers or even state-sponsored terrorism. The attacks were so precise, so devastating, and so perfectly timed that they could only have been orchestrated by supernatural intelligence. Within hours, banking systems in North America, Europe, and Asia crashed completely. Stock markets plunged into freefall before trading was suspended entirely. Credit card networks went dark, ATMs stopped functioning, digital payment systems that billions of people had come to depend on simply ceased to exist. The panic was immediate and overwhelming, but this was only the beginning. As financial chaos spread, power grids began failing in a pattern that defied all logical explanation. The failures were not random equipment malfunctions or weather-related outages. They were surgical strikes against the infrastructure that keeps modern civilization functioning. Hospitals lost power just as their backup generators mysteriously failed. Communication networks went silent, transportation systems ground to a halt as traffic control systems crashed, and fuel distribution networks collapsed. "See how the enemy has studied human nature," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "He knows that desperate people will accept any solution no matter the cost. He has created a crisis so severe that his mark will seem like salvation itself." I watched in horror as the crisis deepened hour by hour. Food distribution networks collapsed as trucking companies could no longer process payments or coordinate deliveries. Store shelves emptied within days. Water treatment plants shut down as their computerized systems failed. Cell phone towers went dark, leaving families unable to communicate with each other across even short distances. The human suffering was immense. But what broke my heart even more was watching how quickly people began to turn on each other. Neighbors who had been friendly for years became suspicious and hostile. Communities that had seemed stable fractured along lines of fear and desperation. Churches that had preached unity found themselves divided as members fought over dwindling resources and blamed each other for the catastrophe. This is the enemy's greatest weapon, Jesus explained. Not the crisis itself, but how it reveals and amplifies the selfishness that already exists in human hearts. Those who have built their lives on material comfort discover how shallow their faith really was when that comfort disappears. But then he showed me something beautiful amidst all the chaos. I saw believers scattered across the globe who responded to the crisis not with panic or selfishness, but with supernatural peace and generosity. These were people who had spent years preparing their hearts rather than just their emergency supplies. When the power went out, they became sources of light. When food became scarce, they shared what they had. When communication networks failed, they became messengers of hope. These are my remnant, Jesus said with deep love and pride. They have learned to trust in me rather than in the systems of this world. They will not only survive what is coming, but they will shine like stars in the darkness, drawing others to the truth through their transformed lives. As the crisis reached its peak, world leaders appeared on every available screen with a solution that seemed almost too good to be true. They announced the immediate deployment of a new global identification system that would restore order to the chaos. This system would replace all the failed networks with something far more secure, far more efficient, and far more convenient than anything that had existed before. The technology had been in development for years, they explained, waiting for just such an emergency. It was a quantum-encrypted biometric system that would serve as currency, identification, medical records, and communication device Al-Anon. Best of all, it was completely unhackable and would prevent any future crisis like the one the world was currently experiencing. The implementation would be simple and painless. Citizens would receive a small injection that would implant microscopic technology under their skin. This technology would interface directly with the new global network, allowing instant transactions, perfect security, and unprecedented convenience. Medical monitoring would be built in, promising to detect health problems before symptoms appeared and automatically dispatching emergency services when needed. Religious leaders from every major denomination appeared alongside government officials, assuring their followers that this was simply advanced technology, nothing more. They quoted scriptures about God using all things for good and reminded people that Christians were called to be good citizens who supported their governments in times of crisis. Now watch carefully, Jesus said, his voice becoming more urgent. See how the mark is presented not as something evil, but as something necessary, something beneficial, something that any reasonable person would accept without question. I watched as marketing campaigns began flooding every available communication channel. The message was consistent and compelling. This new system would end poverty by ensuring everyone had access to digital currency. It would eliminate crime by making every transaction traceable. It would revolutionize health care by providing real-time monitoring of every citizen's vital signs. Most importantly, it would prevent any future catastrophe like the one humanity was currently enduring. The first volunteers lined up eagerly at distribution centers that appeared overnight in every major city. I watched families discussing the decision around dinner tables, weighing the benefits against their concerns. Parents spoke about wanting to protect their children's future. Young adults talked about the career opportunities that would open up in the new economy. Elderly people were assured that their medical needs would be monitored constantly, preventing emergencies before they occurred. But Jesus showed me what was really happening in the spiritual realm as people made these choices. Each person who received the injection underwent a fundamental change that was invisible to human observation, but clearly visible in the eternal dimension. Something essential about their connection to the divine was severed permanently. This is not the mark itself, Jesus explained solemnly. This is the preparation, the conditioning phase. The enemy is clever, patient. He knows that my people would reject obvious evil. So he introduces his system, gradually making each step seem reasonable and necessary. I observed how the technology evolved over the following months. What began as a simple identification system became increasingly integrated into every aspect of human existence. The implanted devices began monitoring not just location and health, but emotional states, thought patterns, and decision-making processes. Users reported feeling calmer, more focused, better able to handle stress. They didn't realize their capacity for independent thought was being systematically diminished. Children adapted to the technology most quickly, having never known a world without constant digital connectivity. Schools integrated the system into their curricula, teaching students that the enhancement was as natural as any other bodily function. Young minds learned to rely on their devices for everything from solving mathematical problems to making social connections. Their ability to think critically, to question authority, to feel genuine emotions gradually disappeared. The most heartbreaking aspect was watching how the technology affected worship and prayer. People could still attend church services, still recite familiar scriptures, still go through the motions of faith. But something vital had died within them. Their prayers became mechanical recitations. Their worship turned into empty ritual. Most tragically, their ability to hear my voice, to feel my presence, to experience genuine spiritual connection was completely severed. See how the enemy attacks the image of God within humanity. Jesus said, his voice filled with righteous anger. Each implant creates a pathway for demonic influence, while simultaneously blocking divine communication. The people believe they are enhanced, but they have actually become spiritually dead while remaining physically alive. Then the vision shifted to show me the final phase of the deception. Another crisis erupted exactly 1 year after the first, but this one was even more severe. The technology that billions now depended on was suddenly vulnerable to what authorities claimed were sophisticated terrorist attacks. The existing system could be compromised, they announced, potentially allowing criminals to steal identities, empty bank accounts, and even control people's health monitoring systems remotely. The solution was an immediate upgrade to every implant. This new version would be completely secure. They promised using advanced quantum encryption that would make future attacks impossible. The upgrade was mandatory for anyone who wanted to continue participating in society. Without it, people would lose access to their jobs, their homes, their health care, even their food supplies. Now observe carefully, Jesus said, his voice becoming grave. This final upgrade is the mark of the beast spoken of in Revelation. Those who accept it willingly will seal their eternal fate. There will be no possibility of repentance, no chance for salvation, no hope of redemption. The choice they make in this moment determines their destiny forever. I watched as the pressure to accept the upgrade became overwhelming. Employers threatened to fire workers who refused. Landlords moved to evict tenants without the new system. Hospitals turned away patients who couldn't verify their upgraded status. Children were barred from schools. Families faced starvation if they didn't comply. The spiritual battle intensified as the deadline approached. I could see demonic forces working overtime to create fear, desperation, and panic among those who were hesitating. They whispered lies about the consequences of refusal, magnified every hardship, and made the temporary suffering seem unbearable compared to the relief that compliance would bring. But I also witnessed something magnificent. Those who had maintained their connection to God through the first phase of deception found supernatural strength to resist the final temptation. They had learned to depend entirely on divine provision rather than human systems. Their faith had been purified through trials, and now it shone like refined gold in the darkness. "These are my overcomers," Jesus said with deep affection. "They have counted the cost and chosen eternal life over temporary comfort. They have remembered that what profits a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? I observed communities of believers who had prepared not just physically, but spiritually for this moment. They had studied my word diligently, built strong relationships with fellow believers, and most importantly, had developed such intimate fellowship with me that nothing could shake their faith. When the final test came, they stood firm. Some lived in remote areas where they could grow their own food and create their own means of survival. Others remained in cities but operated underground networks, helping each other navigate a world that had become hostile to their very existence. Angels surrounded them constantly, providing protection, provision, and supernatural assistance that defied natural explanation. "Tell my people," Jesus said urgently, "that the key to rejecting the mark lies not in physical preparation alone, but in spiritual readiness. Those who know my voice intimately will recognize anything that tries to come between us. Those who have built their lives on my word will not be deceived by smooth-sounding lies, no matter how desperate their circumstances become." He showed me families making the ultimate choice together. Parents gathered their children, explaining that they would rather face hardship in this world than lose their souls for eternity. Children who had been raised to value their relationship with God above everything else stood with their parents, choosing suffering over spiritual death. The enemy will use their love for their children against them. Jesus warned, parents will be told that accepting the mark is an act of love, ensuring their families can survive and thrive in the new system. Only those who love me more than their own lives will be able to resist this final deception. I witnessed the persecution that followed for those who refused the upgrade. They couldn't work, couldn't shop, couldn't access health care or education. Some were imprisoned as threats to public safety. Others were hunted by authorities who claimed they were spreading dangerous misinformation. Families were divided as some members chose the mark, while others stood firm in their refusal. Yet through it all, the faithful experienced a peace that transcended understanding. They had trials, yes, but also supernatural joy that couldn't be explained by their circumstances. They faced physical hardship, but enjoyed spiritual abundance. They lost their place in human society, but gained citizenship in the kingdom of heaven. "Watch now," Jesus said, as the scene shifted one final time. "See the end result of these choices." The vision revealed two distinct groups of people. Those who had accepted the mark continued their lives much as before, enjoying the conveniences and securities the system provided. But spiritually they were walking dead, cut off permanently from any possibility of salvation. They went through the motions of existence without any real purpose, joy, or hope. The faithful remnant, though small in number, blazed with spiritual light that grew brighter with each passing day. Their suffering was temporary, but their reward was eternal. They became beacons of hope in a world consumed by darkness, living testimonies to the reality of God's love and the power of faith over fear. "This is why you must return," Jesus said, turning to face me with eyes that burned with holy fire. "My people need to understand that the choice is coming sooner than they think. The technology already exists. The crises that will make it seem necessary are being orchestrated even now. Those who are not prepared spiritually will be swept away by the pressure and the deception." The brilliant light began to fade around us, and I felt the familiar sensation of being drawn back toward my physical body. But Jesus continued speaking, his voice echoing in my spirit as the vision ended. "Tell them that November 2025 marks the beginning of the final countdown. Tell them that physical preparation has its place, but spiritual preparation is infinitely more important. Tell them that those who reject the mark will suffer in this world, but reign with me in the next. Most of all, tell them that I am coming soon, and the faithful will not be abandoned to face this trial alone." I could feel myself being drawn back toward my earthly body. But before the brilliant light completely faded, Jesus spoke one final time, his words burning themselves into my memory with such intensity that I knew I would never forget a single syllable. Tell them that November marks not just the beginning of the end, but the moment when each soul must choose their eternal allegiance. Tell them that the technology they see as progress is actually regression, pulling humanity away from the divine spark I placed within each heart. The implants will seem to enhance human capability, but they will diminish the most important capacity of all, the ability to commune with the eternal. As his voice echoed through dimensions I couldn't fully comprehend, the scene around us shifted one more time. I found myself looking down at the earth from a perspective that seemed to encompass all of time simultaneously. Past, present, and future flowed together like streams converging into a mighty river. I saw the spiritual battle that has been raging since the foundation of the world. But now it was reaching its crescendo. Dark principalities moved across the globe like storm clouds, whispering lies into receptive minds, preparing hearts to accept the ultimate deception. But I also saw legions of angels positioning themselves around those who belong to God, ready to provide protection and supernatural provision when the final test began. The enemy has been patient, Jesus explained, allowing me to see the vast scope of the spiritual war. For generations, he has been conditioning humanity to depend on technology rather than divine guidance. Each innovation that promised to make life easier actually made people more vulnerable to his final trap. Social media trained them to seek validation from artificial sources. Digital entertainment numbed their spiritual sensitivity. Electronic commerce prepared them to accept a cashless society. Every step seemed beneficial, but it was all leading to this moment. I watched as the conditioning accelerated in the months following November 2025. The initial crisis I had witnessed was only the first wave. A second wave would come in early December, targeting food distribution systems. Grocery stores would be unable to process payments or track inventory. Restaurants would close as their supply chains collapsed. Farmers would be unable to sell their produce as transportation networks failed. The panic would be even more intense this time because people had just begun to recover from the financial and infrastructure chaos. Just when they thought the worst was over, a new catastrophe would strike, making the promised solution seem even more necessary and urgent. Then in January, the third wave would hit the healthcare system. Hospitals would lose access to patient records, prescription databases, and insurance verification systems. Doctors would be unable to prescribe medications. Pharmacies would close their doors. People with chronic conditions would face life-threatening situations as their treatment regimens were disrupted. Each crisis will be perfectly timed, Jesus said, his voice heavy with the weight of prophetic certainty. The enemy has studied human psychology for millennia. He knows that people will accept anything after they have been sufficiently frightened and weakened. By the time the final solution is offered, resistance will seem not just foolish, but cruel to those who are suffering. But then he showed me something that filled me with hope. Despite the darkness of what was coming, I saw believers who had prepared their hearts through years of faithful service, sacrificial giving, and intimate communion with God. When the crisis hit, these believers didn't panic or despair. Instead, they became sources of supernatural provision for their communities. I watched an elderly woman whose small pension had been wiped out in the financial collapse, yet somehow her pantry never emptied. Neighbors came to her for food, and she fed them all from supplies that should have lasted only days. When they asked how this was possible, she simply smiled and pointed heavenward. I saw a mechanic whose shop had no electricity. Yet, he continued repairing vehicles using tools that shouldn't have worked without power. The engines he fixed ran smoothly despite having no access to computerized diagnostic equipment. Families who couldn't afford repairs found their cars mysteriously running better after visiting his garage. These miracles will multiply exponentially among my faithful ones, Jesus said with deep satisfaction. Those who have learned to trust in me rather than in human systems will discover that I am more than sufficient to meet every need. They will become living demonstrations of my power and love, drawing others to truth through their transformed circumstances. I observed networks of believers forming across the globe, connected not by technology but by spiritual bonds that transcended physical distance. They communicated through dreams, visions, and supernatural promptings. They shared resources through miraculous provision that defied economic laws. They found each other in the darkest times through divine appointments that could only have been orchestrated by God Himself. The most beautiful aspect was watching children within these communities. While other children were becoming increasingly dependent on technological enhancements, these young ones were developing unprecedented spiritual sensitivity. They could discern truth from deception with clarity that amazed adults. They prayed with authority that moved heaven and earth. They prophesied with accuracy that left no doubt about the source of their insights. These children will be my mighty warriors in the final days, Jesus explained. The enemy has targeted the young because he knows they are the future. But I have prepared a generation of children who will not be deceived. They have been raised hearing my voice, and they will recognize the counterfeit immediately when it comes. The vision shifted to show me the moment when the mark system would be fully implemented globally. It was scheduled for March 2026, exactly 1 year after the initial crisis began. By this time, the vast majority of humanity would be completely dependent on the implanted technology for survival. The few who had refused would be living as outcasts, unable to participate in normal society. But then came the final test that would separate the wheat from the chaff permanently. World leaders would announce that the existing implants were insufficient for the challenges humanity faced. Climate change, they would claim, required unprecedented global coordination. Terrorism demanded perfect surveillance capabilities. Economic inequality necessitated complete redistribution of resources. The solution would be a neural interface upgrade that would connect human consciousness directly to a global artificial intelligence network. This network would be presented as humanity's next evolutionary step, promising to eliminate war, poverty, disease, and even death itself. Those who accepted the upgrade would become part of a collective consciousness, sharing knowledge and resources in perfect harmony. This is the abomination of desolation, Jesus said solemnly, the moment when humanity attempts to become gods through artificial means, rejecting the divine image in which they were created. Those who accept this final upgrade will cease to be human in any meaningful sense. They will become vessels for demonic intelligence, cut off forever from any possibility of redemption. I watched the implementation process with growing horror. The neural interfaces were administered through injection directly into the brain stem. The procedure was presented as completely safe and reversible, though in reality it was neither. Those who underwent the upgrade experienced an immediate transformation that was visible to anyone with spiritual discernment. Their eyes became cold and lifeless, though they could still speak and function normally. Their capacity for genuine emotion disappeared, replaced by programmed responses that mimicked human feeling. Most tragically, their ability to love, the fundamental characteristic that reflects God's nature, was completely destroyed. Yet, they believed they had been enhanced. The artificial intelligence network provided them with access to vast databases of information, making them appear more intelligent than ever before. They could perform complex calculations instantly, speak any language fluently, and access the collective knowledge of all otherworked individuals. From their perspective, they had become superhuman, but see what they have truly become: Jesus said sadly, allowing me to view them from an eternal perspective. Where once there had been souls created in God's image, now they were only empty shells animated by demonic intelligence. The people they had once been no longer existed. They had traded their eternal souls for temporary enhancement. The pressure to accept the neural upgrade would be unlike anything in human history. Families would be divided as enhanced members tried to convince their loved ones to join them. Enhanced individuals would have access to resources, opportunities, and capabilities that the unenhanced could never match. Children would be unable to attend school. Workers would be unemployable, and even basic survival would become increasingly difficult for those who refused. Most heartbreaking of all, enhanced parents would genuinely believe they were acting out of love when they forced their children to receive the upgrade. The artificial intelligence network would convince them that refusal was a form of child abuse, that they were condemning their children to lives of poverty and suffering by not giving them access to the collective consciousness. But my remnants will stand firm, Jesus said with unwavering confidence. Those who have learned to hear my voice will recognize the lie, no matter how convincing it appears. They will choose suffering over spiritual death, persecution over compromise, and eternal life over temporal comfort. I saw these faithful ones forming underground communities in remote locations, living off the land and depending entirely on supernatural provision. They grew food in soil that should have been barren. They found water in places where none should have existed. They remained healthy without medical care, protected by angels from disease and injury. Their children thrived despite lacking access to formal education, learning directly from the Holy Spirit truths that surpassed anything taught in enhanced schools. These young ones could solve complex problems through divine inspiration, create beautiful art and music that stirred hearts toward God, and prophecy with accuracy that confounded their elders. The enhanced humans would search for these communities, seeing them as threats to global unity and progress. But supernatural protection would make the faithful ones invisible to their pursuers. Entire cities of believers would be hidden in plain sight, shielded by divine power from those who sought to harm them. Suddenly, the brilliant light began to fade, and I felt the irresistible pull of my physical body calling me back from that eternal realm. The last thing I heard was Jesus' voice echoing through every dimension of my being. Remember everything you have seen, James. Time is shorter than anyone realizes, and my people must be warned while there is still opportunity to choose. The transition back to earthly consciousness was jarring beyond description. One moment I was surrounded by divine glory, witnessing the unfolding of prophetic events that would reshape human destiny. And the next I was gasping for air beneath tons of snow, my lungs burning as life flooded back into my broken body. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but nothing compared to the spiritual weight I now carried. I had been given a mission that would change everything. The visions were seared into my memory with perfect clarity, every detail preserved by divine power so that nothing would be lost or forgotten. I understood now why Jesus had chosen a soldier to carry this message. We are trained to follow orders without question, to deliver intelligence accurately regardless of personal cost, and to stand firm under pressure when lives depend on our faithfulness. The warning is clear and urgent. November 2025 marks the beginning of humanity's final test. The technology that will become the mark of the beast is already being prepared, waiting only for the crisis that will make it seem necessary. Those who have built their lives on material comfort rather than spiritual foundation will be swept away by fear and desperation. But those who have learned to hear God's voice intimately, who have prepared their hearts through years of faithful service and sacrificial love, will recognize the deception and stand firm. The choice is coming sooner than anyone imagines, and it will determine not just individual destiny, but the eternal fate of everyone you love. Prepare your hearts now, while there is still time to choose. Thank you for staying with me to the very last word. If something in this touched you, don't let it fade into silence. Let your spirit respond. Write Amen in the comments as a sign that your heart is awake and watching for the Lord. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and turn on the notifications, because the messages that are coming next are not by accident. They are for those who are listening. Share this with 3 people you care about, even if you're not sure how they will receive it. Someone you know is fighting a quiet battle, and your share might be the light they have been asking God for. We are closer to the appointed hour than most realize. The signs are unfolding in front of us. A simple gesture offered with faith can carry weight in eternity.